Welcome to this event in our series on From Pain to Hope, Israel-Palestine in 2026. My name is Mathias Risse, and I'm the director of the Carr-Ryan Center for Human Rights at Harvard Kennedy School. The goal of our series here is to bring in speakers who, from very different perspectives, can address this question of whether there might actually be progress from pain to hope this year or maybe at some point in the not too distant future, and what that would mean for them. Today, I'm here with Amit Segal, one of Israel's best-known political journalists and a leading voice identified with the Israeli right, and thus one voice that matters profoundly in assessing what kind of progression from pain to hope there might be. Amit Segal is a senior political analyst on Israeli television, Channel 12, and publishes the daily newsletter It's Noon in Israel. Segal is widely read for his reporting on coalition politics and for articulating and often defending the security worldview that has become so dominant in Israeli mainstream politics since October 7th. In English language conversations, he's especially associated with arguments for sustained Israeli operational control where necessary, deep skepticism toward near-term Palestinian statehood, and a regional strategy that prioritize deterrence of Iran and normalization with Arab states, even absent a final status Israeli-Palestinian agreement. Welcome, Amit.
Hi, I plead guilty.
So everything I've said so far about you characterizes your positions correctly. Are we on the same page so far?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then let me start with a somewhat general question that's also to kind of bring us in a conversational context here. So from your point of view, what is it that audiences outside of your region, especially audiences in the United States and in Europe, are most misunderstanding about how Israelis experience the current political reality?
So first of all, good evening, everyone. I see some familiar names in the audience. Hello to everyone. I would say as follows: it's not only about the current situation, but about the sentiment of Israelis. The most basic experience of Israelis is that no matter where you are in Israel, as we speak, be it in Jerusalem, like me, or in Tel Aviv at a cocktail bar, or in the bar in the desert near Eilat, or in the Bam North, you are always up to 80 minutes the most, 80, of driving from someone vicious who wants to kill specifically you, be it with a knife, a rifle, firearms, or ballistic missile. And usually it's less than 80 minutes and not necessarily by car. As we all know, from October 7th, it was 5 minutes walk from Gaza to the kibbutzim. From the north, the nightmare scenario was just invading, storming the Galilee. And when it comes to ballistic missiles, it's usually something like, I think, 8 to 9 minutes. So this is the main sentiment. I think there isn't a single country on earth that this is its permanent existential experience. I know Ukraine is fighting for its life, or has been fighting for its life for over the last 4 years, but it hasn't always been the case since the Ukraine became independent. The U.S. fought a civil war, but it wasn't always the case. The United Kingdom fought for its life in a glorious way in World War II, but it's not the case as we speak. That's why they have only one ship in their navy, compared to thousands before. That's the main thing about Israelis. That's why I would define the entire perception of Israelis as cautious pessimism. Cautious pessimism towards very positive ideas about living side by side with our former enemies without the security guarantees that they will never be able to destroy us again.
I want to look at this, of course, also from the point of view of people living in Gaza. But before going to Gaza, let me ask you something about current events that I know you have already written about in your daily newsletter, namely about just what happened yesterday.
Yes.
So Israel's parliament just yesterday on Monday passed a law approving the death penalty for Palestinians convicted of murdering Israelis, and a measure that has been harshly condemned by many in the international community and also by rights organizations as discriminatory, both discriminatory and inhumane. At the symbolic level, what stood out was far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir wearing a new spin on his label to signal his support for the bill, a picture that really went around the world. Now, I understand from your newsletter this morning that you actually do not support this law. Can you fill us in a little bit about how you see this context?
Yes. So first of all, I think that everyone that murders Jews only because they are Jews or Westerners, as we all saw on October 7th, should die at the scene of the crime. That's my perception. I mean, but however, had they been arrested without possessing any threat any longer, this law would do nothing but international damage to Israel's reputation. And I'll explain. There isn't going to be a single terrorist who is going to be hanged as a result of this law. There is already a law in Israel enabling hanging people who committed crimes from the type of murder against Jews as the reason because of genocidal reasons. Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi criminal senior
Was the
figure,
last, yeah.
was the first and the last in 1963, I think.
Mm.
So the ability exists. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a populist far-right politician, wants two things. One is to get more votes in the upcoming election in October 2026. It's only 6 months from now. And the second, he wants the so-called leftist prosecutors to actually demand the capital punishment. However, this law does nothing of what he began in the first place. So after the fact, we can say only a damage, no results on the ground. Either you support capital punishment or not, it doesn't really matter. But this law will only harm Israel's image, which is not in its skyrocketing as we speak.
Yeah. So let me maybe explain a bit more what I find so troubling about this law, and then I'm not quite sure whether we're on the same page or you mostly think it's not the right kind of way of getting at certain goals. So for one thing, democracies and parliamentarians in the Knesset also pointed this out, that basically democracies have been on a path away from the death penalty. Israel has been with other democracy on this path, and so going back, having legislation that will make it easier to impose the death penalty is just, not going into the right direction for democracy. And then, of course, the other aspect, the part about the discriminatory part here is that this is something that either in theory or in practice would affect basically Palestinians in the West Bank and would not be applicable to Israelis who would be killing, who would be carrying out hate crimes against Palestinians. So it's the sheer fact that there is such a law and the discriminatory component that I find troubling. Is this also what you find troubling, or is it something else that you find troubling?
Okay, so I know it's not the most popular position to have in Harvard, but I think that the only side in this conflict that seeks to commit genocide against the other side is the Palestinian one. We all saw it on October 7th. 6 hours of murdering 1,200 Israelis deliberately, including babies, women, elderly people, etc. While I detest and condemn the idea of terror, no matter where it directed to, or to whom it's directed. And while I condemn national hate crimes from a marginal minority of the Jewish side, I think that the widespread phenomenon of trying to eliminate the Jewish state and its Jewish citizens belongs only to the Palestinian side. So I do see a difference. I think everyone who commits a crime should be sentenced severely and not see a daylight after in their lifetimes. However, when this is a part of a mass plot to kill as many Israelis as possible in order to destroy the only Jewish state on earth, so yes, I support capital punishment for the terrorists who committed October 7th. We call them the Nukhba. the so-called elite. I detest this word when it elite when it
Mm.
comes to terrorists. But those who entered the kibbutzim, the peaceful villages, murdered, raped, beheaded, and kidnapped should be sentenced to death because they were part of something bigger. It's the equivalent
Mm.
of 6 hours in the Holocaust. This was an orchestrated attempt to commit Holocaust. Of course, it failed because unlike 1939 to 1945, now, thanks God, and the IDF, we have combatants.
So let me get back to some other components of what you just said in a moment. Let me just kind of go back to the
Sure.
law. So are you in principle opposed to having for Israel's democracy to put a new law facilitating the death penalty? That's one question I have here. And are you in principle okay with having a law that would have a differential application in principle to Israelis and Palestinians, regardless of what then the reality would be that we are talking about?
No, so let's differentiate. First of all, I don't think there is a need for a new legislation because it
Mm-hmm.
already exists. I think there is a need to actually implement this legislation on the participants of the October 7th massacre. I think this is a unique event, even in the very violent atmosphere of the Palestinian terrorist organizations over the last 50, 60, 70 years. This is something unique. No wonder it got so much attention. This is one thing. If let's imagine there was a Jewish member or a Christian member or a I don't know or a British member within those Nukhba terrorists, I would have supported implementing the law at the very same fashion. If
Mm-hmm.
in a few years from now, God forbid, we'll hear about a plot to deliberately kill Palestinian civilians in order to commit genocide to the Palestinian people, I would definitely support it. I believe it's not going to happen. And by the way, according to the current law, it can still happen. If it happens, capital punishment applies for Jews as well. Jews,
Mm-hmm.
Christians, Muslim, no matter how
Mm-hmm.
what the religions of those devils.
Okay. So let me come back to some other things. So you said this. So first of all, I want to point out there isn't like one unified Harvard view on anything in this scenario. One reason why this has
I
been
know.
so difficult for us to deal with is just precisely because there's so many voices on campus, and there's also
Yes.
so many people from the outside who attribute a kind of unanimity to us that is not the lived experience. I just want to say this for the record. But
Yeah.
on the substance of the genocide question, so the way you just described that was you refer to October 7th as an act of genocide committed by Hamas against Israelis, but as I'm sure you are aware, Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, international human rights organizations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, the UN itself, and genocide experts have converged and the International Court of Justice has found a plausibility on legal grounds on this. But all
Mhm.
these other groups have converged on this judgment that the IDF has been committing a genocide in Gaza, and in fact, the convergence is so strong at this stage that it's a plausible guess that history will judge it. That is that not your sense of things?
I beg to differ. First of all, B'Tselem is allegedly an Israeli organization, but it's heavily funded by foreign countries. So I wouldn't treat it as an Israeli. I think it serves the interests of the anti-Israeli sentiment. By the way, it's not me who claims this. Not the lion's share, but a significant share of B'Tselem members, and you can actually read it on Haaretz, which is not the most right-wing newspaper in
No.
Israel.
Mm.
Absolutely. So they resigned from B'Tselem and other organizations for being too soft on the monstrous terror following October 7th. The claims for a genocide began even before Israel. It began even before Israel invaded Gaza following October 7th. Now, I find it rather ridiculous to claim that Israel committed genocide because if you take a look at Israel's abilities uh, versus the growth of the population, even during
Mm.
this very bleeding period of time known as the 2023 to 2025 war, you still see an increase in the population. The rate of the collateral damage That is to say, the deaths of citizens, which is tragic, of course, compared to the number of combatants, terrorists, is the lowest in the history of urban warfare. You can actually check it, fact check it. Second, Israel has the military capabilities to really genocide not only Palestine, but Turkey, Belgium, anything else. And we know that we suffered heavy, unprecedented losses, life-wise, on October 7th. Why hasn't Israel used any of those weapons? Do you know that Israel's usage of explosives was higher than many other wars on a very tiny populated area, and nonetheless, the collateral damage was the lowest in such conflicts. So what I'm trying to say is that when
Mm,
you take into account this fact and you see what Israel did, you must come to conclusion that this is exactly how it played for Yahya Sinwar, the mass murderer of
mm,
Israelis. He based his war plan on three populations. One, the Israeli population, to press or push its leadership to end the war in return for the hostages. It has worked. Second, the Palestinian population, to which he planned to get killed in the highest number possible because he was intolerant. He didn't really care about the citizens because he didn't act as a leader of state. He wanted them to serve as a weapon, as a human shield, etc. That's why he located his bunkers and his headquarters under hospitals, etc. A third
mm,
population, and here it comes to Harvard, was the Western population, the
mhm,
Western public opinion, which played, unfortunately, exactly the role Yahya Sinwar had planned for it in the first place. Because for us, Westerners, suffering means you are right. The more you suffer, the more you are right. And I must confess that I do not accept this moral equation. No, they suffered more. I know that as time passes, the image or the horrors of October 7th fade away. However, I don't forget the difference between those two. There wasn't a single case of Israeli soldier raping a Palestinian woman in Gaza. There wasn't a single case of a soldier beheading babies in Gaza. There wasn't a single case of kidnapping innocent Palestinians in Gaza. I do not accept the comparison. The prisoner swap deal, this morally flawed term, which compares babies, innocent women, innocent children, and innocent elderlies to mass murderers of Jews, of people who sent suicide bombers to buses in the center of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, it's comparisons always tricky in their own ways, right? I mean, I've heard this point before also about, the casualties and percentage compared to other scenarios of urban warfare. And of course, it's also simply true. I mean, the IDF is such a mighty army; they could have done quite a bit more damage. But if you look at what these arguments are about the ascription of genocide, to some extent, it's in the numbers, right? So there was a recent Lancet report that led to a correction of numbers, and that basically said until January 2025, so more than a year back, we have roughly 75,000 deaths in Gaza, which is 25,000 more than had been estimated. So that is 3 to 4% of the population.
Including 23,000 terrorists.
Right, but then I mean I don't know, but the vast majority not being terrorists. But so in
Yes,
terms of
but 1 to 2.
in
Yes,
terms of
compared to
American numbers,
Fallujah.
this
Yeah,
yeah,
compared to Fallujah, etc.
in terms of American numbers, this would be 12 million people, right? But
Yes, but
the other thing, yeah,
I must say, yes,
mm,
sorry to interrupt.
mm,
Yes, had the United States of America decided to invade Mexico, rape,
mm,
behead, and trying
mm,
to extinct the Mexican culture and the Mexican
yeah,
people, I would say that in a war that comes later, had the Mexicans killed 4 million US soldiers and 8 million citizens, it would be tragic. It would be enormous. It would be unprecedented almost. But it's not. It's not something that didn't happen. Hadn't happened in history. That was exactly the case in World War II, I think.
Yeah, it's again this the thing with comparisons, right? So if the United States actually were to invade Mexico and wanted to ruin their culture, they could just militarily easily do it. Hamas on October 7th basically did as much damage to Israel as they could possibly do, right? I mean, there was
Oh,
nothing more in the cards,
no, no,
right?
no. So here,
Right. Mm,
so we are to
mm,
judge Hamas, to give Hamas a get out of jail card because they were weak. So we are to measure the cruelty and the inhumanity of terrorist
mm.
organization only because they cannot act. So perhaps we shouldn't have treated Bin
No,
Laden
no,
that
no, no.
bad because no, because he just
Yeah.
all he could do is just to crash four planes on four various places on the eastern coast. So I do
No.
not accept it. The only reason this day ended not with 20,000 victims or 200,000 victims or 2 million is yes,
Mm,
because thanks God, the IDF is way stronger than Hamas, but it doesn't change a thing of their monstrous abilities. And I want to add something which is more important.
mhm.
I don't see Hamas as an isolated organization. In a
Okay.
retrospect, I think we failed to conceptualize the conflict. Hamas was two Iranian commando divisions on our border, southern border. Hezbollah wasn't only a Lebanese terrorist organization and a Lebanese party were represented in the parliament, but six Iranian commando divisions on our northern border. And the
Mm,
proxies, the Houthis were, an air force or a ballistic missile force in Yemen, but an Iranian one. And Iran itself was part of this army. There was a plot. The plot was to destroy the state of Israel with the proxy in a tragic miracle or a tragic coincidence. It helped Israel recognize the past. Yes, after the fact, but before the entire plot to destroy Israel came to feasibility.
mm. I mean, a lot of moving targets now, but let me go back to where I was earlier about why, there's this convergence of judgment in the human rights community, the UN and the independent experts, in
Sure.
increasing numbers on this. So the other point, in addition just to sheer analysis of numbers, is the systematic attack on infrastructure in Gaza, the kind of thing basically apparently designed and definitely having this effect of undermining living conditions in Gaza. So we're talking about attacks on hospital infrastructure, universities, educational, all these things, sanitation
Mhm.
infrastructure. So that's the other point that has been made in order to classify this as a genocide.
Yes.
How do you relate to that point?
Um, this is a question I was asked by Christiane Amanpour on CNN
Hmm.
some 2 years ago, and I
Hmm.
replied, I told her, listen, Christiane, you have been covering or you have covered every single armed conflict on planet Earth since
Hmm.
I was at kindergarten. Could you please provide me with one conflict in which one side provides the enemy with humanitarian aid? One, just one. And then she moved to to the other question. So I ask you, do you know a
Yeah.
single? Because if the you said, and
Mm,
I absolutely
mm,
agree. I come from I studied law in the Hebrew U, and then I moved
mm.
to London in UCL and studied the public policy. So I'm quite familiar with social science, and I know how hard it is to conceptualize things from the real
Yeah.
world into science and to make it into peace. And we are old, so we were before ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I think it is quite hard to give Israel the lowest grade when it comes to genocide, etc., where one cannot give even a single example that shows or that reaches the level of support Israel had provided. Okay, now we can actually argue about whether situation in Gaza was bad or not. Yes, it was very bad because when a war is going on, it's always not a pleasant sight.
Yeah.
However, I don't see a single way to actually unroot this monstrous army of terrorists from underneath the ground, underneath hospitals, underneath schools, kindergartens, etc., without somehow damaging the populated areas. After evacuating the population, every single hospital that was evacuated became only after a substitute was had been pre-prepared. So
Yeah.
while I know it's not a pleasant idea, the whole idea of war. That's why, by the way, Israel had never initiated a full-scale war against Gaza, even after hundreds of rockets on a daily or weekly basis. I don't know how to do it on a different way. Any other explanation that might explain to me what Israel should have done differently
Hmm.
must actually touch those points. Would you agree to live near a terrorist organization? Because if you do not agree, you must find a better solution. I'm open for suggestions.
So in terms of just the criteria for that being a genocide. So again, the second topic that I was talking about here is the systematic destruction of also civilian infrastructure, right? And so if, to the extent that that's actually true, then maybe the consequence to draw from that, if you can have a war only at the expense of inflicting a genocide, then that is an illegitimate war.
Yes, but if every house, every residential place is full with explosives, wouldn't it
Mm,
change your definition? Wouldn't you define it as something different? I'll give you an example, okay? Let's say I'm a terrorist, okay, and I use my capacity as a Channel 12
mm.
journalist to actually smuggle explosives into the prime minister's office. Would you count me, had I been found and shot at the spot, would you count me as a journalist? I'm not sure. I would define this incident as a terrorism, not an act of journalism. The same applies for doctors. Same
Mm.
applies for physicians, teachers, UNRWA workers, etc. Yes, the sad fact is that unlike any other conflict, areas of conflicts over the last 20, 30 years, every place in Gaza, or almost every place, I would say 80% of the houses and the buildings served simultaneously as headquarters, bunkers, etc., or storage facilities for explosives. And then again, what would you do? Is there any other way to treat this threat other than destroying the spot? Would you define it as a genocide? Do you know a single case in which a country is interested in a genocidal act, but before that it evacuates the population, builds hospitals, and provide humanitarian aid? To be honest, I'm not very familiar with such situations.
Let's maybe move slightly on to a neighboring topic, namely about the future,
Let's let's bury the hatchet. Yes, bury the hatchet and move
the
to. Yeah,
well, this might lead us quite likely to a different hatchet, but let's go there.
absolutely.
So let me just kind of tell you my hope of what will happen here, since our series is from pain to hope question mark. And so here's how I see the situation, and I know you don't see it this way. So then please tell me where I'm wrong. So what I think here is Israelis, Palestinians, they all have human rights. They're all human. They have the full range of human rights protection. We live in a world organized and defined by states. So, effective human rights protection realization only happens within states. There need to be a state looking after people's human rights. Israelis
Mhm.
deserve human rights protection and realization. Palestinians deserve human rights protection just as much. So Palestinians also need a state to look after their human rights, and they deserve that anyway. This should not come from, Israel's graces. They deserve a state. And then the question becomes, would this be a separate state? So would Israel, in which case Israel would have to make some substantial territorial concessions, or would it have to be like a unitary state with some federal structures, perhaps, to realize Palestinian self-determination, in which case Israel could no longer solely be a Jewish state. So either way, I know this would be painful, but isn't this the
Yes.
moment for statesmen to say, we will never have peace in this region until both of these groups have state protection?
Okay, so this attempt has already been done. Actually, the disengagement plan, which I have to admit, I opposed it in 2005,
Mm.
included the evacuation of every single Jewish settler, including the graveyards, including schools, synagogues, etc., in order to actually get a international legitimacy. By the way, it was accompanied by a letter, a presidential pledge
Mm.
from the then U.S. President George W. Bush, approved by I think both houses of Congress, that Israel would have a the full legitimacy to reiterate if attacked from Gaza after it evacuated. The idea in Israel was actually that now they have their own area and they can focus after the occupation, the alleged occupation had already ended, to actually build their own future. What came next was that Hamas Hamas won the election in the Palestinian Authority in 2006, and a year and a half later, occupied Gaza from the Palestinian Authority by killing hundreds of Fatah members, of the members of the Palestinian Authority.
Mm.
Unfortunately, Hamas is still very, very popular. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that 67% of Palestinians, according to the most reliable Palestinian pollster, Shkaki, 68 or 69% support October 7th. 15 other percent, 1/5, partially support it. I don't know what does it mean to partially support a terrible massacre, maybe
Mm.
murdering only 600 or killing babies but without beheading them. What I'm trying to say is that unlike the distorted perception of Jewish violence versus Palestinians, the idea is exactly the other way around. There isn't a single Israeli Knesset member that officially supports violence against Palestinians, where 84% of the Palestinian population support it. The speaker, or the president, sorry, of the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, sent his condolences after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, Yahya Sinwar, the mass murderer, and it took him weeks and months to condemn partially October 7th. So, to be honest, and if we come back to the opening remarks, I
Mhm.
think it's very hard on Israelis to give peace a chance while the other side doesn't give peace a chance. The last attempt was during the Oslo Accords, where Yasser Arafat pledged to actually sign a peace agreement with Israel, and then he got an offer for 93% of the West Bank, and his answer was the Second Intifada with suicide bombers, directed directly by him, sent directly by him. So when push comes to shove, Israelis prove that they are willing to actually for compromises. And I have to say, as you described at the beginning, I am from the right wing of the Israeli society.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a good idea in the first place. However, I admit the fact that the vast majority of Israelis were for it. The vast majority of Palestinians, however, never recognized Israel as a Jewish state. And that's the main problem. You cannot have a Palestinian state, a Judenrein state without a single Jew, and then to have a binational state named Israel only by name.
No, but so the original motivation for my plan for my proposal here is, you will have long-term stability only if both Israelis and Palestinians have both a political and economic context in which they can actually flourish. And obviously, will not be easy to accomplish given this history of pain, and in particular, this vast acceleration of pain in the last few years. But that's why I was talking about statesmanship here, right? So rather, I mean, I know you are interested in, Israeli politicians and what made the various prime ministers great.
Sure.
Wouldn't a statesman at this moment say there is not ever going to be peace unless they both have a state structure protecting them? And shouldn't we
Mhm.
form the right kind of international coalition to make that happen? And isn't now the right moment just because there's been so much pain?
So my answer includes two parts. One is
Mm.
historically, I'll give it a very short history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the eyes of Israel's public opinion.
Mhm.
From 1987 onwards, there was a huge support in Israel for this two-state solution. Uh, maybe because the Berlin Wall fell and people felt that the end of history era is, it began, and it's like, if France and Germany can live side by side with peace, and Russia and the United States, so
mm,
why not a new Middle East? Then came the Second Intifada, suicide bombers. People feared to actually take a bus, or even to actually be on their car near a bus in the traffic
mm,
light, because they're going to die, and they ceased to believe in the two-state solution. But nonetheless, they didn't want to marry the Palestinians in a new Middle East. They wanted to divorce them. As you
mm,
said, let's have two different national entities, and then we'll have our land, they will have theirs, and we'll live side by side with a cold peace. Okay, no
mm,
mutual football games, but a cold peace, like between Israel and Egypt, for instance.
mm,
It failed too after the disengagement. And that's the reason why Israelis are very skeptical towards the idea of speeches, international guarantees, international
mm,
legitimacy, and pledges by Palestinians, or even walls and fences for protecting them. That's the main conclusion from October 7th, in my opinion, that the
mm,
only guarantee for the survival of the state of Israel is the IDF protecting Israeli civilians from defensible borders. That's the main
mm,
thing. Now, when it comes to the Palestinians, unfortunately, there hasn't been a single case in which a how would I say it, a single, a prominent and popular Palestinian leader would actually recognize Israel as a Jewish state. There hasn't been. There have some very non-popular Palestinian leaders with 2% popular vote who half-hearted supported it. But both President Arafat and President Abbas never recognized Israel's existence as a Jewish state. And actually, what they're doing is exactly the other way around. I don't find any other reason why the
mm.
Palestinian Authority would use 7% of its budget to pay salaries for convicted terrorists, those terrorists that we talked about at the beginning. While we might have our differences as for the capital punishment, I guess we might all agree. I hope we might all agree that if you send suicide bombers for a bus or a kindergarten in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, you are a murderer. So why should the Palestinian Authority pay them a high-tech salary every month, or for their families had they died? Why 7%? It's like the Israeli culture and immigration budget combined, and they refuse to stop it. They just channeled it to a new NGO, but the Palestinian taxpayer money goes there. The only thing is, what if you say, what would you say? Sorry, if you heard that Israel pays 7% or even 1% of its budget for Jewish fundamentalists who killed and injured Palestinians?
So then maybe, so if you don't want to go this way with the, kind of either two states or a unified state with a federal structure. So if I'm looking at your own writings about this, I see these two components there. For one thing, about the Gaza area, you want to divide the Gaza area, right? So you want to rebuild one part of the Gaza area basically under Israeli supervision, and you basically want to completely ignore and abandon the other part, and basically your assumption is that this will just go into permanent decline. And in addition, you want to continue the rapprochement in the area, so the strengthening of relationships to Arab states in the
Mhm.
region, without while giving basically a minimal voice to Palestinians. But I'm really wondering, I mean, isn't this a recipe for disaster? I mean, isn't this basically saying to the Palestinians, look, we are thinking of you really only as people who will attack us in the future, and thereby you are creating your own realities, and you're also bringing in a lot of solidarity from other parts of the world that will make Jews everywhere in the world unsafe?
Mhm. Okay, it's not my desired outcome. This is the
Mm,
lesser of evils. I just described the process that
mm,
can be compared to Berlin post World War II. I'll
mm,
explain. No one had described to themselves that following World War II, Berlin would be split into two different cities, one
Mm,
democratic and Western, and the second is a communist and Eastern. However, it emerged from a temporary situation into almost a permanent one for 30, for more than 40 years. 38 years was the Berlin Wall. I think I'm not for it. I just describe it. I think
mm,
what we are seeing now is East Gaza versus West Gaza. Now, my idea was to actually finish the job with Hamas, unrooting it from the population, destroying each and every tunnel. 60% have already been destroyed. The other 40% might take some time. Taking each and every Kalashnikov rifle, stopping the idea in which Hamas controls this population based on violence and Kalashnikov rifles, and then rebuild Gaza as a whole, while allowing, not forcing, allowing Gazans to do what you can do, I can do, and the 59 participants in this conversation can do. They can
mm,
leave Gaza and they can return to Gaza. They can emigrate and immigrate. And
mm,
that's exactly what I described. However, since the war stopped, or it's not actually stopped, it's more of a pause button at a
mm,
very special, a unique, in a very unique situation. What I think we should do in the meantime is to build new demilitarized cities in the Israeli controlled side, funded by the Emiratis and the Qataris, maybe, and other actors, to which Gazans could actually move from the West Gaza, which is in which was reduced to rubble. That's my temporary suggestion. I do not recommend under any circumstances that Gaza would be left in rubble forever. I
mhm,
just think that as long as Hamas is there, I wouldn't spend a cent. I wouldn't put a dime on rebuilding Gaza because I know what happened before.
mm.
After
Yeah.
every conflict, all the money, all the concrete, all the iron was used first and foremost for building tunnels, and only then to build houses for the Palestinians.
So by giving a perspective of statehood as a concretely reachable goal, you would undermine support for Hamas there, right? So if this is a proper package with proper credibility from Israel's leadership, if Benjamin Netanyahu said something to this
Mhm.
effect, if Donald Trump supported it, if the Arab states supported it, Hamas's support would go away because they have something better to live for.
This is if we speak in a Western university, and our
Mm,
values are, we want prosperity. I'll explain. We got used to in the 20th, they have a second part of the 20th century gave the world this win-win policy. We all saw in these amazing 70, 80 years or 60, 70 years of
mm,
prosperity that I hope are not coming to an end. But we saw that we can win and we can earn simultaneously by not fighting. We can cooperate. Belgium and France, Israel and Turkey, we can flourish from it. But we got a reminder in the Russia-Ukraine war for a win-lose war situation. President Putin invaded Ukraine in order to take territory from Ukraine. It was evil, it was monstrous, but it make a logic sense in his eyes. I earn on your expense. And
mhm,
the international law flies through the window. What you have to bear in mind, in my opinion, is that in Gaza, with fundamentalist Muslims, the idea
mm,
of lose-lose exists. I want you to suffer. They knew what was going to happen before October 7th. And that's why this idea of incentives doesn't pay. Israel tried it prior to October 7th and it failed. To give more, the idea was as the economy thrives, there would be less incentive to attack Israel. Actually, it was exactly the other way around. And in my opinion, the gist of it, at the end of the day, it all boils down to education. As long as the education system in the Palestinian Authority, in the West Bank, and in the Gaza Strip, educates children and youngsters. The Jews are pigs. They should die. The trees would reveal their locations for you to murder them. That they are not allowed to live. That they are not allowed to have children. That they should be massacred. As long as on the first grade in Ramallah you are being taught mathematics in the following question. Ahmad killed 3 Zionist pigs. Muhammad killed 4 Zionist pigs. How many Zionist pigs were killed altogether? As long as this is the process, it would not help to use our Western philosophy or to implement or force our Western philosophy, because all the money, all the good intentions, all the ideas about sovereignty, etc., would be used by them. I'll give you one last example. We Israelis had the impression before October 7th, there was a perception that said, listen, look, Hamas was a terrorist organization. But once they get Gaza, they'll have to take care of education, of the road system, traffic, economy. So it would make them more moderate. And what we learned from Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, the 3H, is that when a fundamentalist terrorist gets a country to govern, it's not the country that makes him more moderate, it's him that makes the country more terrorist. It uses all the facilities of a country, Lebanon, Yemen, and Gaza, against as a very industrious, significant weapon against Israelis and the West.
So let me push back against a couple of things that you said, and then I'm actually going to bring in some of the audience questions. So, and I know you kind of alluded to this. You said this now, and this is also in your writings about this. That you basically said giving them a state was pretty much done, and it failed. And you say there was a certain level of economic prosperity, but that's just really not what I see. So the credible descriptions of Gaza in the pre-war, the pre-October 7th period, they typically emphasize structured restrictions on movement and trade, on exit and entry, on Israeli decision making over dual use goods and what counts as such, and there were periodic escalations. So there was continued Israeli control, and of course the UN has always considered Gaza still occupied because of this control of the borders and the airspace. All of this, of course, is consistent, with certain bits of normalcy, pockets of visible consumer, culture, cafes and malls, and all these things. But Gaza never was a state the way Egypt or Jordan was a state. So you can't say this has been tried, and failed. It was always this, this kind of this very constrained package of very limited statehood, and it was that, I would say, that led to these frustrations.
Yes, but the entire idea of the Israel-Palestinian conflict was that Palestine would never be 100% state. 100% means, for instance, that you can you can have an air force, for instance. No one even officially demanded it. Why? Because there was an understanding that Israeli security needs should be addressed, especially when the geographic or the geostrategic situation of Israel is very unique. The future to be Palestine actually overlooks Israel's airport, Israel's most populated area, the Tel Aviv area, Gush Dan, etc. So now we are in the discourse about what is the percentage of a country. Is it 80%, 20%, 30%? Let's say the Palestinian Authority is 20%. It would never reach more than 70, 75%, as I said. And no one even demanded it. And that's why I think, I'll tell you my perception, because I don't want to pretend that I'm someone else. I'm against a Palestinian statehood between the river and the sea. Because in my opinion, in the next few generations, as long as Palestinians do not recognize the idea of Jews coming back to their homeland, as written in the Bible, not as a colonialist power that should be removed from here in the first when they have an option to do so. So I want this national identity, this history, to be tolerated, accepted, and recognized. And
Mm,
since I'm quite pessimistic about the idea of this happening soon, I'm against Palestinian statehood. However, I'm not into apartheid state. I don't think there should be two types of citizens. I think Arab Israelis, or as some of them call themselves, Palestinian Israelis, enjoy full rights. They vote to the same parliament. They get the same social security. They pay the same taxes. They play the same soccer teams, etc. And that's why the
mm,
limited independence named Palestinian Authority represents now the reality. I'm not getting even into the question of occupation. I don't
mm,
know any precedent in which a country occupied a territory from someone who had never owned it. Jordan. I put it aside because we don't have
mm,
3 weeks for a debate. All I'm
no.
saying is, all I'm saying is that had the Palestinians cooperated with the idea of coexistence, against my own will, they would have already had their country.
So, in terms of Palestinian citizenship in Israel, so there was actually a few questions in the audience already, and this gives me an occasion to bring them in. So, people were asking about the West Bank. So,
Sure.
increasingly tighter occupation restrictions in the West Bank. Is there a scenario where these people are eventually getting emancipated as Israeli citizens?
First of all, to the facts, more than 70% of the territories in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as you call it, uh, are populated by Palestinians. Only as far as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, something like 9% inhabit the settlers, the Jewish villages, and there are other 20% ish of what we call nature reserves, empty areas, etc. That's why the image of more and more violent Jewish settlers funded by the Jewish government or Israeli government trying to take more and more land from Palestinians does not or quite contradicts the facts as we know it. Yes, there were many cases of illegal house building by Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. Like in any other area, you are not
Mm,
allowed to build just a I don't know a skyscraper on the Tel Aviv Jerusalem road, right?
mm.
But there hasn't been a single case in which someone entered a Palestinian village by the order of the Israeli government, destroyed it, and let the illegal one and let Jewish settlers to actually enter. Not a single one.
But it seems there has been a whole lot of reports on self-initiated settler
Illegal.
violence
About no, no.
towards, yeah, but
Yeah.
towards
Okay.
which the Israeli government largely seems to turn a blind eye, you know?
Okay, so statistics. According to the UN report, it describes something like 1,100 cases in 2.5 years of what they call Jewish violence. I'll give you some examples just so we see that even if we don't like the idea of Jewish settlers within the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, we can still have the I don't know the way to describe that it's incorrect. I'll give an example. Every single attempt of or every single time Jews go to visit the Temple Mount, aka Al-Aqsa,
Mm.
is counted as a Jewish violence. Why? Aren't Jewish allowed to visit there? Aren't? Aren't them? Second, a Palestinian terrorist tried to shoot a Jewish settler some 2.5 years ago. He shot him and severely injured him. The settler fired back. So since the terrorist was injured, it was counted as a crime against as a Jewish violence, as violent Jewish violence. The day after, the terrorist died of his wounds, so it was counted as the second crime against Palestinians. What I'm trying to say is as follows: it's way more dangerous to be Jewish in Judea and Samaria than to be Palestinian
Mm.
Muslim. Now,
Mm.
while I recognize the fact that there is a rise in Jewish violence by some few hundred extremist activists, and I oppose it, I wrote against it. I was smeared by the right wing as a far leftist in Israel, anti Israeli, anti-settler, etc., I still see the difference. The
Mm,
IDF is fighting this phenomenon, maybe not too efficiently. It should invest more efforts. I'm for putting them in custody, even without evidence, which is quite undemocratic, but hard times demand take hard measures. This is
mm,
not the case with the Palestinians. Without the IDF, Palestinian gangs, Palestinian terrorists would storm into the settlements, killing and murdering babies, etc. That's exactly was the case on October 7th. And for instance, in 2011, when terrorists invaded the Jewish community, the Jewish village of Itamar, murdering 5 family members, including an 11-month-old baby. So there is the main phenomenon of anti-Jewish violence, of refusing to accept the presence of Israelis and Jews in Judea and Samaria. And there is this phenomenon that should be attacked and is condemned by 99% of Israel's politicians and the policymakers of the violence turned the other way around.
mm. I mean, just a practical question. Do you have a hard stop in 4 minutes, or can we keep you for another 10 minutes since there's all these questions?
Let's take 15 minutes. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay,
Whatever. Yeah.
then let me channel some questions of Ines. So Barak Seller is saying this, and apparently you know him because he says, Amit, you recently condemned violence against Palestinians by Jewish Israeli citizens and called it terrorism after previously deflecting the issue in your writing and calling it the settler violence scam. Why is the right suddenly starting to condemn this violence after years of deflection? It seems this shift is driven more by self-interest, with these incidents framed as isolated events rather than addressing the broader base of support politicians, media channels, rabbis, institutions that enables this violence.
Yeah, I saw this criticism following my very harsh words against this phenomenon on Israel's Meet the Press last Saturday. The idea was, if I got it correctly, is that I got an order from the Prime Minister's office to condemn it because it's not that convenient anymore for him. I'll tell you my idea. I am, of course, against it. I used to think, and I think this was the case, that it was rather marginal. Now, the entire idea of journalism, or especially biased journalism, is to focus on something very specific and isolated in order to create the impression that this is way that the scales are way more significant than it is in real life. And that was the way this so-called Jewish violence was covered by the international press and by Haaretz, etc. Now, while I still think it's way more dangerous for to be a Jew in Judea and Samaria rather than a Palestinian, I accept the fact that there are more and more violent young settlers. There used to be some dozens, now there are some hundreds, and they become more violent. And it's troubling, in my opinion, because Israel is a state of law and order, and Israel wants to be a Western a democracy. And in Israel, the only body who is, or the only one who's allowed to use violence is, of course, like in any other country, the army and the police. No one is allowed to actually kill or injure someone only based on their judgment. And that's why I spoke. So you might say I should have said it earlier. I, you know what? Maybe you're right, but here I am.
Here's an anonymous attendee who is saying this. Mr. Segal keeps saying that Palestinians do not recognize Israel, but the PLO, which Israel itself recognized as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, recognized Israel in the 1990s.
Okay. The Palestinian Authority and the PLO, the ruling party there, didn't change the basic, so-called Palestinian constitution, the Palestinian
Mm,
treaty that said that the goal of the Palestinian national movement is to eradicate, and I quote, to eradicate and delete, eradicate and erase every sign of Zionism between the river and the sea. It has never been canceled. There were some tricks like in Senate or in the House of Representatives, but it has never been canceled. President Clinton arrived specifically and personally to Gaza. Now it's crazy to imagine that the U.S. president would visit Gaza to see, to actually observe this historic event in 1997, I think, or 1998, in which this Palestinian treaty is cancelled. It has never been cancelled. It has never been said that Israel is a Jewish state. Now, there is a dramatic difference between recognizing Israel as a state or recognizing Israel as the Jewish state. Because if you demand to evacuate each and every Israeli, every single Jew from your territory, thus creating a Jew-free area, you must recognize the idea that Israel is the home state of the Jewish people. Otherwise, we'll get a Muslim country, a Palestinian country, and a country which is binational, which is not the idea. The entire idea, as you said, was to have safe borders and clear identities. And since this is it, I just do not accept the facts described in the question.
I may just have one follow-up on that. So in terms of describing Israel either as the homeland of the Jews and a Jewish state, right, there's a bit of a difference because there's also the Arab Israelis, right? So if you say Israel is a Jewish state, you are ignoring them. If you say Israel is the homeland of the Jews, it can also be the homeland of other people, right? So
No, I
no.
give it the differentiation is that every citizen equals or gets the equal rights on a
Mm,
personal basis. However, the nation state is Jewish, which means, for instance, that every Jew on earth can immigrate to Israel automatically. It doesn't
mhm.
say anything about, trying to argue that, you as a Christian, me as a Jewish, and the third person as a Muslim enjoy different levels of citizenship.
So
This is
that
not the case and will never be.
so that means you are fully supportive of equal rights for Arab Israelis.
This is the situation in Israel since 1948.
Here's another question from another anonymous attendee. So he says, Mr. Segal, do the Palestinian people have the right to self-determination in a state or not? And if not, why does Israel get to have that right?
No, I think that every nation deserves a state. However, I still think, and from the evidence that I see and just described, that the number one goal of the so-called national Palestinian movement is to destroy the state of Israel. Once it changes, I think my assumption or my analysis and prediction and forecast as a, political commentator of the Israeli public is that there would be a very significant support for it. Once Israelis are convinced that the goal of the Palestinian movement is not to eradicate Israel and to see its inhabitants as colonialists who should go back to Europe in the best case scenario, but
Hmm.
to have their own state.
Hmm. Okay, let me channel one question from Noah Margalit Haliba, who is broadening the discussion a little bit. So she wants to talk about Lebanon and the conflict zone in the north. Lebanon feels like a parallel story to Hamas Gaza. We declared a decisive victory over Hezbollah, yet we are seeing repeated military operations in the same areas. At what point does mowing the grass stop being a strategy and start being an admission that there is no end game? Is there actually a political horizon in Lebanon, or are we locked into this managed deterioration indefinitely?
The history of Lebanon is bleeding both towards Israel and and within, from within. But this conflict is very, very different because whereas in the past, Hezbollah claimed to be the defender of Lebanon, now it's clear for everyone this round began only in order to protect Tehran. It began following the assassination of Khamenei and the beginning of the Israel-US-Iran war. So no one in Lebanon is under the impression that Hezbollah tried to defend its own citizens. They pay the heaviest price. 1/5 of the Lebanese population is now are now refugees. So I do think that while Lebanon would not be in I don't know, would not necessarily sign peace agreement with Israel and would not join the Abraham Accords, I do think that once the Iranian regime falls and this Ayatollah regime is toppled, Hezbollah would necessarily collapse, and then there would be a very short yet powerful window of opportunity for a new Lebanon
Mhm.
without those dark forces that took this beautiful country with beautiful wine. It was the best wine on earth and beautiful scenic spots and one of the best nations in the neighborhood. They took it
Mhm.
to took
Mhm.
it nowhere.
Maybe as a follow-up to the Lebanon question, so there is voices in Israel that insist on a renewed occupation of southern Lebanon. Is that something that you would support?
Invading Israel invading southern Lebanon.
Occupying the
Okay,
southern Lebanon.
I'm not a big fan of actually getting again putting Israeli boots on the Lebanese mud. I don't think that something good might come out of it. So this is only a temporary solution until or a temporary pressure put on Hezbollah in order to retreat and to stop the fire. Once Hezbollah is dismantled or cease to exist as a powerful terrorist organization, there is no point in Israeli soldiers stepping on Lebanese soil.
And now, since you mentioned Tehran, so let's just also bring Iran into this. I know this has been a lot on your mind. You have been writing a lot about that. Obviously, it is the day-to-day reality in Israel right now
Yes.
that there is this conflict. What
Yeah.
is your hope? What is your hope for that? Where do you, I mean, a kind of realistic hope? What do you think this can, what is the goal of Israeli military intervention there right now?
The goal of the Israeli-US intervention was to prevent Iran from becoming the Middle Eastern North Korea, a
Mm,
lunatic regime, by the way, more lunatic than North Korea because it's based on fundamentalist perception of Islam from actually ruling the area. Um, and I think that after 47 years of chanting death to America, death to Israel, it makes perfect sense that the Israeli prime minister and the US president would actually believe those chants that those are original and it
mhm,
means something. That's the reason. Now, I think that the Operation Stop Nuke uh, succeeded. I think that the Iranian nuclear project is all but dead. The uranium is buried. The infrastructure lies in rubble, and they will have hard times recovering it. Iran is a regional power. It's 80% completed, and now it's for the Iranian people. Um, I I'm quite optimistic about it. I think the Iranian
mhm,
people are going to actually storm the streets and protest. And I think this regime, nothing, there hasn't been a single fact of those that had caused Iranian protesters to demand change. Nothing had changed, nothing had solved. And that's
mhm.
why I believe it's going to happen in the next few months.
Are you not worried that Iran might turn into a failed state and become a major source of terrorism, much bigger than it's been in the recent past?
Unlike the moderate Western prospering country they
But
were prior
it
to the two
comes in
operations.
degrees, right? Yeah. I mean,
Okay,
a failed state could be infinitely worse than the current reality,
yes, but
right?
there is only one worse thing than a failed state who
Mm,
fosters terrorism, and this is a prosperous state that fosters terrorism. We
mm,
Israelis actually experienced it. We shed a lot of blood since 1982. Since 1982, almost every single Israeli who died out of terror or wars died by either by weapons produced in Iran, funded by Iran, or by terrorists who were trained by Iran. So if this is, I mean, I mean, nothing can be worse than this.
mm,
Just the very same thing with nuclear facilities. So I'm
mm,
more optimistic than this, and we know
mm.
the Iran's history of coup d'état and revolutions. So I believe in the power of the Iranian people.
So by way of drawing this fascinating conversation to a close, let me bring in a question from Abraham Nadif Eisen about actually the title of our series, so From Pain to Hope. And Abraham captures this very nicely by speaking both what you are hoping and what you hope from institutions like Harvard. So he says the series is titled From Pain to Hope and question mark, right? So the way we think of this, from pain to hope, question mark. What do you think? What do you think of this title? So I want to kind of rephrase that as in, what are you hoping for? From your point of view, and what is our part? So our on this side of the conversation as representatives of the prominent institution with really a broad diversity of opinions. I just want to reiterate that one.
Well, I think we should stick to the basic facts. Terror is
Mm,
bad. Killing innocents is bad. Trying to genocide someone is terrible. Terror fostering is terrible no matter who does it. If you oppress your people, so the fact that you are come from a Muslim country doesn't give you any reduction, or it doesn't give you any, any. You can't get away with it. As long as we stick to those options, to those principles, I think we'll have a better debate. The number one problem of our lifetime, in my opinion, is that we first see who the oppressor is, and only then we actually the jury's out for the verdict. No, it should be exactly the other way around. If someone is doing something bad, let's just condemn it. If someone is oppressed, let's be for him without other political calculations. That's my humble analysis. That's
mm,
why I went out loud against Russia invading Ukraine, although the Israeli government were kept silent for a very, very long time, unfortunately.
mm.
And
And what
this is
is your
just one
hope?
example.
What is the hope you are directing at us? Any kind of role that you would want institutions like ours to play?
Oh, um, to actually have an elevated system of friend or foe.
Mm,
Sometimes, I'll give you an example. In one of the kibbutzim you know what? I'll show it to you.
mm,
I don't know where it is. There was we found in a kibbutz, in the ruins of one house of kibbutz in which a grandmother and grandfather were killed. We found a book for children dotted with, shots, with gunshots, by bullets. And next to it, there was a record of Roger Waters. Okay? So the kibbutzniks loved Roger Waters. Now, I guess he would be quite insulted because he sees Israel as the oppressor. I would say that we share many values. We have mutual values of democracy, of human rights, freedom of press, judicial independence, etc., etc. And we should see that we don't find ourselves, due to political reasons, cooperating with people who oppress gays, who do not have a effective legislative branch, who oppress their
mm,
people, etc. That's my hope.
okay. Amit, I know you are headed into Passover, so thank you for taking
Thank you
time
so
away
much.
from cleaning your home in preparation for
You
Passover.
gave
So
me
really,
you gave me the perfect excuse, so I want to thank you personally for actually rescuing me from this Sisyphean act.
I definitely appreciate very much you taking the time, and take care,
Thanks
and
so
thank you
much.
everybody for joining us.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Amit.
Happy Passover. Thank you.